Hey folks, we're about to start another episode of Ask Us Anything about electrochemistry. But before we begin, because we have some extra time, there are a few things I'd like to go over first. While we're waiting for the live stream to start, type your question into the chat. The sooner we get your question, the sooner we'll be able to answer it when the live stream starts. We usually try to answer questions in the order that we receive them, but it's definitely possible that we get so many questions that when your question comes up, we're out of time. If you are a Tier 1 or a Tier 2 YouTube member, you do get priority in us answering your question. You also have the opportunity to join us on the stream to either share slides or talk to us in person about your specific electrochemistry research questions. If you are a Tier 1 or Tier 2 member on our YouTube channel, you will find in the community post the link and password to join us on our broadcasting platform. We get a lot of questions about electrochemistry, whether it's through our YouTube comments, webinars, email, phone conversations. We get lots of questions from people about electrochemistry. And sometimes responding to a YouTube comment or trying to describe a cyclic voltammogram over the phone isn't always the easiest way to teach or describe electrochemistry. That's why we created this live stream. In the Ask Us Anything About Electrochemistry live stream, you can ask us any questions you have about electrochemistry, and we can use better tools and take more time to describe some of these electrochemical processes to help you with your research and understanding of electrochemistry. Now, in our time of doing this live stream, we've observed that if you ask a very, very specific question, we might not be able to answer it. It'll be a little bit too specific for us. On the other side, if you ask a very broad question and you're interested in just a very broad understanding of cyclic voltammetry, we have separate tools, we have other resources to help you. So we do have a YouTube video on cyclic voltammetry, an introduction to the subject. And if you're interested in more of a long-form course on, say, potentiostats to electrodes, electrochemical rotators, cells, different types of accessories, Pine Research has been supporting electrochemistry research and teaching for decades. Recently, we have developed new electrochemical simulation software called Aftermath Live. Aftermath Live is an online streaming platform where you can simulate popular electrochemical techniques like cyclic voltammetry. It's a powerful research tool as you might simulate a cyclic voltammogram to support an electrochemical mechanism for your redox reaction that you're studying. But Aftermath Live and cyclic voltammetry simulation is also a very powerful tool when it comes to just learning electrochemistry. In fact, in previous episodes of the live stream, we have used Aftermath Live and our simulation software to answer some of the questions that you have. If you're watching this on YouTube, you can get a 10% discount on your first month of the basic and research editions of Aftermath Live by using the coupon code PINEYouTube10 when you're at checkout. Aftermath Live is a powerful tool and you can cancel your subscription at any time. Go to aftermathlive.com to check it out. Link is in the description below. Our live streams are normally on Fridays from 1 to 3 p.m. They normally last about 2 hours, sometimes a little bit more, sometimes a little bit less. If you miss the live stream, you'll always be able to watch it on our YouTube channel, and in the description we put timestamps for every question that was asked. This way you can look through the description and find the questions that are most relevant to your research and then watch those at your leisure. Also, we apologize in advance if we mispronounce your name. If on the YouTube channel you can put anything you want as a name. It could be a Pokemon, it could be a string of numbers. But if we call you out and we accidentally mispronounce your name, we apologize in advance. Lastly, please do not spam the chat. We've had numerous instances of people either talking about inappropriate things or constantly filling the chat up with some kind of spam. We will remove you if you do that. Let's keep the chat very clean and just talk about electrochemistry. Sometimes it takes a while before we're able to answer your question. So If you keep typing your question into the chat and spam the chat, then we will remove you from the chat. But if it's been a while and we may have forgotten about your question, one message as a gentle reminder is all that's required. All right, I think that's all of the housekeeping things. Now, let's start the live stream. All right, hello everybody.
We are live.
Welcome to another episode of Ask Us Anything About Electrochemistry. We already got a lot of questions going on, so we're just gonna start.
Yeah, we're just going right in. We're not even
going right in.
We're not even gonna banter and make up stuff. How was your week?
How was your week? How's things going?
We're not even doing that. I don't care how your week was. We're just gonna get right into it. We have a lot of questions.
Care a little bit about your week, but we
a little bit. Yeah, and actually, I do care about your week.
Yeah.
I just want you to know that.
Yeah, I care about your week. I care about your week too.
I mean, you know, a little.
Yeah, a little bit.
Speaking of people's weeks, someone is interested in SEI formation, which is always something that I think about. Do you have any idea, says Sakar, of SEI formation in a composite silicon graphite anode of a lithium-ion battery under different depths of discharges? Because under lower DODs, they behave very differently. Under low depths of discharge, they have a drastic reduction in the state of health in the first few cycles only. Oh, yeah, well, okay. So every anode, whether it's silicon or graphite composites or just graphite by itself, has a dramatic decrease in its capacity from the very first one or two sometimes cycles and subsequent cycles, and that is because of the SEI formation. So what happens is the first, let's say you start with a battery where the cathode is lithiated and the anode is not. That's a typical starting point. That is a fully discharged battery. Whether you're talking about depth of discharge or state of charge, those are just inversely related. So I tend to think about it as state of charge, but I understand what you mean. Different states of charge, just different DOD or depth of discharge. And so the start of working with the battery involves reduction at the anode, oxidation at the cathode. That is the charging process. The reduction at the anode involves the intercalation of lithium into it. That's charging up the battery. The SEI formation is also largely a reductive process. And so the very first cycle that you do, the capacity is artificially inflated because some of the current and the voltage lagging, and there might be a different voltage lag. Like what happens is you'll get a lag in the voltage as you're applying whatever current. Time that it takes for that to happen will be longer, or it will lag at different voltages because the SEI is forming and eating up some current as well, right? And so, to a certain extent, the answer to your question is a self question. I guess you're saying, first of all, why is it different? From charge 1 to charge 3 or 4 or whatever. It's because the SEI is forming and it takes up the current. And so once the SEI is stable and formed on your material, it doesn't take up current in subsequent charge or discharge cycles. And at those subsequent cycles, like charge 4, 5, 6, 7, 1,000, everything, right? The current associated with the charging or discharging is largely attributed to the lithium intercalation or deintercalation. That's it, right? Now, there can be things where the SEI gets thicker over time under certain conditions, and sometimes you'll have, contributions of those auxiliary processes. Sometimes you have secondary charge storage in the SEI, which is not great. So there are things where you'll have inconsistencies from scan to scan, but the main very readily repeatable and observable kind of asymmetry, if you will, is in the first 1 or 2 scans of any anode, basically, where the SEI is forming. So that is part 1 of my answer. Part 2 of my answer is that silicon specifically is a very troublesome material to work with as an anode. It has a very high theoretical capacity, it's like several thousand, 2,000 or 4,000 milliamp hours per gram. It's a very, very high specific capacity, about 10 times as much as graphite. So it's really no wonder why people are attracted to using it and trying to study alternative anode materials involving silicon. Tin is another one that has a similar kind of enormous capacity. The problem is it has a tremendous volumetric increase and decrease throughout the charge-discharge process, unlike graphite, which does not change volumetrically very much at all. The result of the volumetric change is that it can cause really weird results. It can cause degradation. It can cause some of the things that you might be observing at different depths of discharge or cycle numbers. It's probably why I'm guessing you're looking at a composite of silicon with graphite, because the amount, having some graphite there can help stabilize some of that volumetric expansion. But this is one of the main reasons why commercial batteries cannot really use, to this point, silicon or tin or some of these other materials, because the change in volume on the charge and discharge is so dramatic that the material starts to just fall apart. Okay, so it's possible that some of the behavior differences you're observing could be a result of this change in volume and possible structural degradation. So I would encourage you to kind of be cautious about that specific aspect of silicon as an anode material as well.
Cigar has another comment, and then we'll get to Tamunga's question. Cigar says, the point is in a composite anode cell under low DOD reduction in, I think it's state of health, is quite large in the first 200 cycles, whereas this is not the case in a graphite-only anode cell.
The composite anode cell under low depth of discharge. So low depth of discharge is mostly charged.
Okay.
So if it's depth of discharge is how discharged it is. So as I'm reading this, Cigar, I think what you're saying is under low depth of discharge, that means that it's mostly charged. So at high, like almost fully charged, right? Under low depth of discharge, reduction in state of health is large in the first 200 cycles, where that's not the case. Okay, so I think it's similar to what I just said. The reduction in the state of health is probably because the silicon in the composite anode is really hard to keep consistent over long-term cycling. Very short-term tests, to my knowledge, have shown a lot of promise for materials like silicon or tin or some other materials like this that have really high theoretical capacity. Short-term tests show tremendous capacity, but the cyclability and the state of health and the reversibility plummets very quickly. And it's because of this volumetric expansion and degradation of the material. So I'm guessing that there might be, if I had to guess as an engineer, if I were doing this research and I was in graduate school again or something like that, what I would probably do is add increasing but small percentages of silicon into my graphite anode. Like I'm saying, like 1% silicon, 99% graphite. See what happens, right? How does that compare to the pure graphite? Does it even improve at all? Is it so small of an amount? And then 1%, 2%, 5%, 10%, something like that, right? I'm guessing that you have a high enough amount of silicon in your composite that it's sort of fundamental thermodynamic, maybe the thermodynamics is the right, just it's fundamental drawback of this volumetric expansion and degradation is causing you trouble. Even after only 200 cycles, you might be able to have success by decreasing the amount of silicon in your composite to the extent that it's like expansion and it's like it has to be allowed to expand and then contract, right? And it's like when it's all silicon, the expansion and contraction can cause like short circuits to happen, because if it expands and then pushes against the separator, that's a problem. If it ruptures because it's expanding so much, or when it contracts, like if it doesn't form the same crystal structure as it did before, then it won't work anymore. Like it won't actually, it's like it'll be like I don't know silicon well enough, right? But I studied nickel oxide, for instance, and nickel oxide has a conversion reaction, and if it as it charges and discharges, gets stuck in this other phase, it won't go back to what it was, and you lose the capacity. The state of health gets worse. So all graphite is wonderful, right? I mean, that's why it's mostly used. It intercalates, deintercalates very smoothly. Lithium doesn't have too much volumetric change, doesn't have too much change in its energy state, its structure. If you charge really, really fast, like anything else, it can fall apart. But silicon has that really tough kind of procedure with it. So that's my read on the situation, and I guess I try modulating the amount of silicon in your composite. You might be able to find maybe a sweet spot where you severely reduce the reduction in state of health at a specific limit of silicon percentage in your anode, is my guess. So Tamogna has a question here.
Yeah.
Okay.
So Tamogna asks, "Hi, thanks for organizing one of the most useful podcast sessions, live stream sessions." Okay, right. I look forward to this one. "In our lab, we keep our potentiostat out of the fume hood and the cell inside the fume hood. We connect the potentiostat with the cell using external wire and crocodile clip. This usually adds an additional resistance. For 3 electrode steps, we calculate this external resistance and adjust it in the software. Usually, we run a short chronoamperometry experiment of 100 seconds. Note the voltage difference between the reference electrode and working electrode with a multimeter, and compare with the set voltage. This way, we can calculate the voltage drop. Divide it with the current and get the resistance. But I am in a dilemma what to do with a 2 electrode system, because if I am correcting the external resistance this way for a 2 electrode system, I risk capturing the wrong picture. So this is a lot, but I think we can walk and talk through it. I think maybe it's easy to kind of share my screen to talk about this, and let's just hide the question for clarity, because what I'm guessing is just start inking. This is kind of how I think about it. So you're using like a traditional sounds like a normal potentiostat with its own cell cable. That cell cable does have its own resistance, and normally in a 3 electrode setup, so I'm just going to call this 3 electrode, we model the resistance the following way. Both the solution resistance and the resistance of our wire, so this is solution resistance. Oops. I don't draw as nicely as Neil does. Plus wire resistance.
I think it's the writing of words that's hard.
The writing of words is hard.
Even with a mouse, you'd think it'd be easier, but it's like not easy to write letters. I draw better than I write letters. You know.
Yeah. I think I'm just bad at everything. Okay. So we model it as this resistor, which is in series with the electrical double layer of your working electrode and the charge transfer resistance. And let's just keep it like that for a simple model. But this resistor effectively is the thing that it's a combination of solution resistance and the resistance of the wire. Now, granted, typically in most situations, this resistance, the solution resistance contributes a lot more than the wire resistance. But the wire resistance can certainly contribute to it. It is made up of this. So this is what we do for a 3 electrode system, because in this type of situation, your reference electrode is connected here. This is where your reference lead would be, and then your working lead is here, right? So this is and then out here you have the counter electrode, CTR. Right, so this is ultimately what you're measuring. You're not measuring this component over here. Now, I'm going to make a new slide, and we're going to kind of do the same thing, but now I'm going to describe a 2 electrode system and what that cell configuration looks like. So in the 2 electrode, this is what we get. It's very similar, but actually different, because here you have counter and reference, because you short the reference and counter electrode on one side, and then you have just working, let's just call it just working on the other side. Well, if you have two metals, they both have effectively this charge transfer. They both have an interface, so they both have a double layer. And they both have some charge transfer resistance for the oxidation and reduction reactions that are occurring. We can effectively say there is some solution resistance in the middle, just between these two, and then the working electrode also has its interface as well. All right. So this resistance, this is kind of the new resistance, and it does consist of solution resistance plus wire resistance. And this is how I would think about this system. Like conceptually, how you think about it and how you correct for it and stuff like that is in a 2-electrode system. This is the situation that's happening, and in the 3-electrode system, this is more of the situation that's happening. And this is also validated through impedance spectroscopy and stuff like that. Now, your question may ultimately, and let's see, does he have any follow-ups right now? Nothing so far. So we use a 3-electrode configuration when we're trying to measure the redox potential of a species because we want to report its standard redox potential with respect to every other electrochemical reaction. So we have a stable redox, a stable reference electrode, and we measure the potential between the reference and the working electrode. And so the solution resistance and the wire resistance contribute to the IR drop that needs to be corrected for. So that's how we use reference electrodes in 3-electrode configurations. In a 2-electrode configuration, depending on what you're trying to do, you're not measuring a quote reference potential in this case. And if you think about it, if I had this connected to a power source, or if I'm applying 1 volt because it's a chronoamperometry experiment, then you're applying 1 volt across this circuit. That's what's happening. And if there's a resistor here for wire resistance, it effectively works the same way as if it was all just in the middle, kind of mathematically. So there's a voltage drop here, there's a voltage drop here, there's a voltage drop here, and so that is how you can think about how is this 1 volt carried across this system. Now, the current that goes through the entire cell is 1 current. The current that's happening at the counter electrode is the same current that's happening on the working electrode, just opposite direction. And so that same current, whether it's a milliamp or an amp or a microamp, goes across this resistance and contributes to a quote IR drop, but it's in this configuration as opposed to this configuration. So that's how I'm going to describe it. So hopefully that's helpful or provides, because actually at the end of the day, you want to capture the right picture, and so that is the picture that I would associate with the 2-electrode and the 3-electrode configuration for your chronoamperometry experiments.
Yeah, and okay. I mean, essentially, either way, you are going to run into the problem of the alligator clip, crocodile clip, connected, adding resistance, whether it's 2 or 3 electrode, you're going to have added resistance there, right?
Yeah.
And if you look kind of carefully at the drawing that Alex just made, for instance, with the 3 electrode setup,
I can just put that back up again.
Part of what is unstated here, I think, if you think about it, the resistance that you have on the left of the reference electrode to the counter electrode, that's what we call compensated resistance. So assuming your potentiostat has a decent enough compliance voltage, right? Essentially, there's added resistance on those clips, for instance, from the working electrode and the reference electrode. That's all captured by solution and wire resistance, that main resistor that Alex drew. But it's almost like a third of it, the resistance that is captured by the reference electrode clip to itself, that part is the compensated part. So it's like the 3-electrode configuration, correct me if I'm wrong, is
Mhm.
sort of at least doing away with some of the added resistance because the presence of the reference electrode makes the added resistance on just the counter clip compensated for.
Mhm.
In the 2-electrode system, that is not the case. You're basically getting all of the resistance from both sides
Mhm.
because it's and possibly the added like Randles or Voigt element on the counter side too.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
And
how do you correct for the 2-electrode system? I think it's a similar thing. I think that you're going to find the um, the solution resistance. I'm not sure if you said how you found it. Did you do impedance or then you didn't do?
so they what they did was they basically did
Oh, I see.
chronoamperometry. They
Yeah.
stepped the potential. The
Mhm.
first few data points in a normal chronoamp
100. They
can
put
be
100
used
seconds
to
though.
estimate the solution resistance. Um, but here's the thing. It's like, okay, um, in a 2-electrode system, like why do you want to correct for it? Sort of say like it's like in this configuration, like people use 2-electrode systems if they're doing like plating or if they're just like a battery is a 2-electrode system, and batteries have a quote uncompensated solution resistance, sort of say, and it's just there. It can be measured with EIS, but people need to correct for the solution resistance when they're making like a potential measurement, or if they're measuring the current at the working electrode, or at one of these electrodes. In the 3-electrode configuration, the reason why this is a problem, the reason why this whole thing is a problem, is because when we want to understand the fundamental electrochemistry, like this is your working electrode, like this represents your carbon electrode or something like that, and like your redox chemistry, sort of say, right? So this constitutes an error in a measured and applied potential.
Yeah.
That it represents an error in that calculation. In a 2-electrode situation, it's just a parasitic loss. And it's not like I analytically need to correct for it so that I know the true voltage or the true current. It's like this is a device, basically. And this is just, there's going to be a little bit of loss. It's still going to measure 1 volt between these two if you put a multimeter on either side of this. And actually figuring out what this is may actually be harder. Actually, I don't even know how feasible it is to measure this in the same method,
I guess
because
in theory, a quick similar to high frequency impedance, right?
yeah,
A
you need
quick
high frequency
in the
impedance.
very beginning of a chronoamperometry experiment, right?
Yes.
The first jump in voltage,
Yeah,
or excuse me, in current, when you step the voltage,
yeah, it would travel through this path.
you would travel through that path because
Yeah, that would be the way to
fast,
get it.
right? So it's a similar thing, and I think just to be clear, Tamonda, it seems like what you were indicating is that you waited for your chronoamperometry to flatten out and you use those. That's not what you want to do. What you
Oh.
want to do, you said 100 seconds. So what you want to do is you want to get a chronoamperometry experiment. Okay, so you're gonna do like a step function. You're gonna apply some voltage, just any voltage, whether it's the 2 or 3 electrode, to be clear, right? Apply a voltage, and then you're gonna step the voltage. Okay, doesn't matter, 200 millivolts, 500. Just step the voltage somewhere, right? A known amount, and then you're going to measure the current response at that step. You're not looking for it to stabilize. You're looking for right away. What is the almost instantaneous? So you're gonna. This whole thing could last 3 seconds, like 1 second step, 1 second done, something like that. It doesn't have. You don't need a long one. So because you want to take like a point every millisecond or half a
Or even
millisecond.
faster.
Yeah, as fast as you possibly can.
Yeah.
Because what Alex was just drawing is the point. The fast speed bypasses any resistor capacitor, like in parallel. At fast speeds, the impedance of a capacitor is minimized, and so that's the pathway for it to go. So what he was drawing was that the current and voltage combination at fast speeds is only the resistor that you're trying to compensate for or determine or whatever, figure out what your loss is. So first of all, just measuring that resistance happens at the fast speed, okay? There's gonna be errors here, probably if you can't get data that fast, no matter what. But you have some chance if you collect data really fast, the first initial point, the change in V and the change in I, take that ratio, that is roughly speaking that resistance, that right there. That's what you want to do, okay? Now,
I can just draw the chronoamp step just so that you know where.
And I'll just talk through. So the point is that I think that for the 3-electrode configuration, the point here is, let me think this through. If the applied potential was 0.5 and you discover that the resistance was like 100 and whatever, you lose 0.1, then the actual applied potential is 0.4. And that's bad because you want it to be 0.5. You're losing 0.1, right? So that's why in the 3-electrode you are doing it. Now in the 2-electrode system, I don't think that's the same calculus. I don't think it means that the applied voltage, I'm trying to think. If you're applying 1 volt, that resistance, does it mean that you don't have 1 volt at? I don't think that's what it means.
Wait, sorry.
With a 2-electrode. Okay, so with a 3-electrode.
I wasn't.
I know you were drawing the thing.
Drawing the thing.
So correct me. Let me think this through and see if I'm saying this right. In a 3-electrode system, we know this very clearly, right? The uncompensated resistance is a parasite on the actual applied voltage. So if you have 0.5, 500 millivolts that you're applying, but the combination of I, the current that's happening, times the resistance, that resistance and the uncompensated is 0.1, then the actual applied voltage at the working electrode is 0.4.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Right. With the 2-electrode system, that's not the same. I don't think. Right. So if you have 1 volt applied and that resistor eats up some, it's still 1 volt at the working electrode and minus 1 volt at the counter. Isn't that right? It's just that the intermediate voltage is different in between. Am I not thinking this through?
The voltage different. So the total voltage, it's like
It's 1 volt.
It's like, let's say this was nothing. This would be like, because just as you know, it's like anode minus cathode, right? So it's V. Let's
V
just call
cathode minus anode.
Yeah, cathode minus anode, and I'm just gonna say this is let's say this is 0.5, and this is negative 0.5. That way you have 0.5 minus negative 0, because
so it's 1, right?
Because one's negative, one's positive, 0.5. So you get 1, and then if there's IR drop here, then this is like
that's high
0.4. It makes these two numbers lower to account for whatever this.
So here's then the point, I think, Tamogna, to your point. You're saying, how do I correct for everything that you just mentioned in a 2-electrode system? You can't, because you don't know what those voltages are. You can't decouple them. So that's the problem. So when you have your 2-electrode system, the voltage, that resistance is eating away at the voltages, but you do not have the ability, without another sensing probe, some other sense of telling what the voltage is at just the working or just the counter, right? Because the difference is still 1 volt, but now instead of 0.5 and minus 0.5, you might have 0.4 and minus 0.3, and then there's 0.3 in the middle. Or it's 1 and 0.2, and you do not have the ability to determine what the breakdown is of those 3 things that adds to 1, because it will be 1. The potentiostat will make sure it's 1, but you do not have a stable reference point to anchor anywhere, such that the only thing, like in the 3-electrode system, the reference is anchored, so the only thing that's changing is the working, so you can compensate and figure out what the working should be. Here, everything is loosey. Everything is changing and going absolutely hog wild, so you cannot control. So you can try to compensate for it, but you do not know really what the voltage is at either side. You just know the difference. You only know the voltage difference. You don't know the potential of the working of the counter separately. So it's not really correctable in that sense, to the extent that you can say, well, my potential of my working is whatever.
Yeah.
The best you could say is that I can add some voltage. Like if I really want 1 volt voltage difference, but I determine I'm losing 300 millivolts at that resistance because of my IR drop. I can apply 1.3 volts.
Yeah.
And then I can say to myself, okay, that means I have the correction is that I have 1 volt between working and counter because 0.3 is eaten up by the resistor, but you do not know what the individual potentials are of each one.
Yeah, well, even that may also have some
May
issues
not be true, right?
because you tell it like, oh, apply 1.3, that may get more current to flow.
Yeah, and then it's not exactly.
That's not
It won't. That may not even work. But in a perfect world, that could be something that
in the 3 electrode.
For sure.
Only
like even in a 2 electrode, you might be able to trial and error, like change the voltage until whatever.
Until you get some kind of current or something.
But the best you can hope for is that you are getting the difference between the working and the counter to be roughly what you want, but you cannot really know what either of them are.
Yeah, this is actually, there's many levels to this, but this is more, it's more like C minus IR minus A, something along, or plus, maybe this is plus because it has to add to the whole thing. Sure. So that's what it really is. The full expression. Hopefully that helps. At least it gives you a complete picture, if you will, of the whole thing. Okay, we got another question
from Shazaib.
Says,
I have coated 3 pencil electrodes with 3 different materials. As expected, the peak potential is increasing in each of the measurements of these in CV and DPV, but facing problems in impedance. Well, there's a surprise. Impedance problems? Get out of here. There is distinctive peak potential difference. Shouldn't be there the Nyquist plot difference?
Or shouldn't there be? Maybe.
Shouldn't there be the Nyquist plot difference in resistance? What would you suggest? Okay, so.
Okay, wait. He's adding.
He's gonna add some information here. I'm trying to conceptualize this. So 3 electrodes, 3 materials. The peak potential is increasing. So like there's different potential at which the peak is occurring. And then impedance. Shouldn't there be a difference in resistance?
Okay, so he's saying
following are the peak potentials. Well, these are currents. So please clarify here. You're saying
so maybe he's saying the current at each peak potential is
okay. So to be clear, Shazai, please clarify. 3 different materials. Let me draw.
Yeah.
I'll draw scenario 1 and scenario 2. Please tell me which it is. And then we'll try to.
I'm gonna.
All right. Is it scenario 1? You have, and then I'll draw scenario 2 down here. Maybe the question's up there.
I mean, I could.
No, you're fine because I just make sure it's not blocking.
Oh, okay.
Is scenario 1 you have compound 1, compound 2, and compound 3? Is it this? I'm going to draw just one peak, right? Whatever. Compound 2. Compound 3. So they are roughly taking place at the same, this is potential, right? They're taking place at the same potential, but they have different peak currents. Or is it scenario 2, where they are taking place at, maybe the currents are different, maybe not, but they're taking place at different potentials. So the potentials are different. Is it scenario 1 or scenario 2? Just to be clear, because what you seem to be kind of indicating both of them at the same time, and I don't know which one you mean.
Yeah.
So that would be. So which of these situations, if you can clarify, are you kind of talking about? Is where the potential that it's the peaks are occurring roughly the same? Case 1. Okay.
Case 1. Okay.
So it's not case 2. So it's case 1.
Case 1.
So this one is bad. This one is good. Okay. Got it.
Okay. All right. We understand now.
Yes.
Okay.
Perfect. Okay.
All right. So the same potential. Okay. Oh, and what he is suggesting is, shouldn't the Nyquist plot be different?
No. Absolutely not. No.
Mm.
So the Nyquist plot, if you have the same applied potential baseline of your impedance, and they have the peak at the same place, that presumably means that all of these three materials have the same E0, the same thermodynamic potential, right? Then no, because the impedance data, all the peaks are at 0.5 volts. Yeah, so no, you should not have much difference. The fact that the current is bigger on some, just, let me talk this through. Maybe.
Yeah, I'm trying to. At the same potential, you get different currents. I mean,
yeah,
the perturbation that you apply in EIS, you're talking like plus minus 10 millivolts. That's the same. It's about the same potential.
About the same potential, and the current is slightly different. It's okay. I'm trying to. At first, I wanted to say no, and the reason is because the same applied potential is the same amount of overpotential, so it has the same driving force for either of the three. Like if each peak is at 0.5 and you do impedance at 0.6, I know 0.5 isn't the easier. Let's just pretend that 0.5 is the E0, right? You have 100 millivolts of overpotential. The charge transfer resistance, or the semicircle that you would get in a Nyquist plot, in theory, is proportionate to the driving force. And so it would probably have about the same, like, semicircle width at the same, because the amount of overpotential is the same for all of those. However, of course, if you just look at it mathematically, technically speaking, the impedance is,
it's the voltage over the current.
It's the voltage over the current, and the current is higher, the impedance should be lower. Technically, the magnitude of the impedance might be lower. That doesn't necessarily mean that the Nyquist plot will look different. I got to think about this for a second. Because if the magnitude of the impedance is lower, that's the thing that's lower, right? The magnitude of the impedance is lower if the I is higher. For the same V. For the same V, the I is higher, so the Z is lower.
Yeah.
And so
in a case where he has three different, I'm assuming this is like a catalytic type of thing, because this is another interesting thing. You have three different electrode materials, and the E naught for the reaction is the same, which means the overpotential, because it's almost like case two in some ways makes a little bit more sense, where it's like, oh, I have to apply more potential to get the same. I mean, actually, no, it's the other way around. At the same potential, you're getting more current.
Okay.
But
let me try to draw something that may explain why this is happening. It's just sort of, I'm not sure if this is perfectly correct. So let me. All right. So there's it's almost two conflicting things. So my initial knee-jerk reaction was absolutely not. This should be totally fine. And the reason that I say that is that you have the three different materials. Right? I'm just going to draw them all black for now, just to save time. So you have case one, or material one, material two, material three. They have like this, right? They're all the same potential. So if you do impedance,
we're assuming the same scan rate.
Yeah, everything's the same. This is 0.5, right? 0.5 volts. All right. So if you're doing impedance at 0.6, oh boy, drawing is hard.
This is hard to draw.
It is hard to draw. See, so you're doing impedance at 0.6. So it's like it's just beyond the peak. You should have a nice like semicircle or whatever. Maybe that's what you get. It doesn't really matter specifically, but just thinking this through. In all of these cases, you are like 100 millivolts positive of the peak. So it's like the overpotential is the same for all three cases. Very generally speaking, this charge transfer resistance is proportionate to overpotential. Just for any reaction in general, like if you have a Faradaic reaction, as you increase the overpotential, the charge transfer resistance generally goes down. You're driving it more. On the other hand, the reason why I had to pause is because, Z is equal to E is equal to I times Z, which means Z is equal to E over I. So if I is bigger for one case, Z should be smaller. However, the final point that I'll make, and then maybe you have something to add, is that when you do this impedance, if I zoom in on this impedance, yes, the current is higher in some of these cases, but let's just look at this specific example, at this one potential. I'm zooming way in. I'm only doing an amplitude, like my E naught is like 5 millivolts or something, right? 5 millivolts or 10 millivolts. So the reality is that on the down part of this curve, for all of these, let me do it in black because that's the original color I did. So it's like I'm doing an impedance on 3 different curves that at that point are all pretty close, even though the current might be slightly higher, but I'm going like back and forth 5 millivolts here and here and here. So maybe the current is slightly different, but it's not enough different. Like even at the peak, you're looking at it's not the raw current. Like I think that's the point here. Maybe that's the point we're going to make. It's a subtracted current. Like,
I have another point that's
about a baseline. So the point is this current that I'm measuring is higher in one of the peaks, but the reality is that for an impedance experiment, what I'm actually doing is applying a voltage. I get a resultant current. Now it might be higher in some, it might be lower. The potentiostat then zeros that. It makes that zero, regardless of what it was. So then when I start wiggling on top of this, I get the same rough amount of wiggle here. Now, this current on the absolute scale, right, for case 1, 2, or 3 might be higher or lower, right? Like this is the higher peak. This is the lower peak. But the reality is that I'm actually, the potentiostat only, the way the impedance measurement works is it only looks at like the I0. So it's actually like, there's a normalization with the way impedance works. So actually it is back to my original knee-jerk reaction, which is that that the fact that the absolute current in the peak is higher is irrelevant, because it starts off at whatever, and then the impedance is looking at the response, not the absolute current. So the response is going to be the same because the response is roughly based on the overpotential. So I think we're back to square one. Do you have anything to add?
Yeah. So now actually you mentioned 2 things that I think to kind of jump on, which is you haven't told us at what potential are you doing EIS. Like we just assumed you're doing it 100 millivolts beyond the E0, but we've had so many people do EIS at OCP, and so if you are doing EIS, the potential, because just to your point, like, oh, all these look a little bit the same in this region. Well, like some people just do EIS at the open circuit potential, and at open circuit potential, they're all going to look the same because the reaction isn't even happening.
Yeah.
So that's another thing to keep in mind. Are you doing EIS where the baseline is at the E naught, the peak potential for all of these? And then the other thing, to Neil's point, is that we don't know enough about your system, but if you have a diffusion controlled process at the time scale of like even that over potential of 500 millivolts, the current that you're getting is diffusion controlled at that point. It's not the purely kinetic information, which is what the RCT, semicircle size is based on, right? The RCT and the double layer determine how big your semicircle is. So if you're just like, oh, you can get higher peaks, and I know you've described it as just like I just changed the material, but if the diffusion coefficient was different for whatever reason, your peak current would also change. But I don't know enough about your system. Well, like maybe you have a porous
followed
electrode.
Up here. He did the impedance at 0.1 volt with the peaks at 0.5. His amplitude is
6 millivolts.
Is 6 millivolts, so it's pretty low. So yeah, and it's diffusion controlled. Yeah. So first of all, you're doing your impedance before, I guess, the peaks. Are you talking about reduction peaks? So either 0.1 is, if it's the way I drew it was like an oxidation peak. So 0.1 would be like nothing is happening. If it's a reduction peak, 0.1 is 400 millivolts of overpotential or whatever. So that's
Yeah.
quite a lot happening. But I think the point is largely whether it's diffusion controlled. Actually, I mean, everything you said is true, right?
Mhm.
But I think that my point is actually more related to how the potentiostat works fundamentally, and that is that differences in current are normalized out because the response is what is measured, is how the impedance is measured. So it's the deviation beyond the baseline,
Mhm.
basically. So at your baseline of 0.1 or 0.5 or 0.9, whatever you're doing, there's a baseline current. One material has a higher baseline current than the other. Those are oxidation peaks. Okay, yeah. So you
Okay.
actually are, in some ways, I wouldn't expect anything different because your
You're at
baseline
0.1 volts
is
instead of
before
0.5.
any of the peaks are even happening. So
Yeah.
first of all, that can demystify it, is that for all the materials, you're doing impedance at a potential before the reduction, the oxidation
Process
reaction of
occurs.
interest is even happening. So I wouldn't expect anything different there. But even if you were, I think it's possible you'll see roughly similar because it's largely dependent on overpotential, not the current. Because like, okay, you have applied baseline, material 1, 2, and 3 have slightly different baseline currents, but then you apply the sine wave and you're just looking for the deviation. And my contention is that the difference in the peak and the whatever may give you slightly different response. Fair enough, and then I would expect slightly different Nyquist plots. However, at such a small perturbation, for the most part, because the overpotential is the same, even if the baseline is slightly different, the change in the current response from 6 millivolts of up and down is probably going to be roughly the same, even if one started slightly higher. And the impedance response is not dependent on where it starts; it's dependent on how much what its reply was, it's like it zeroes it out. It's like, oh, my current response is 100 with this potential, it's 100 microamps, and at material 2, it's 60 microamps. So there's difference there. But then what the potentiostat does before it starts to do its calculation for how the impedance was, it makes those both zero. The current is now zero, and then how much did it go up and down? I mean, it's not really zero, but it's like for calculation purposes, that's what it's doing. That's how the impedance is measured, because it's just how much it goes up or down. So the absolute amount of current difference between each material is accounted for in the calculation necessarily.
Yeah. So it sounds at least that you have like two things to do, which is do EIS at the potential where the reactions are happening and increase. It might be good to increase your amplitude just a little. I think 10 millivolts might be better instead of 6, but yeah, that's just it. Hopefully that was helpful. That was good. Let us get to the next question. Dooley's has a question, comment.
I was going to follow up with you.
Yes.
About, I know we kind of addressed it in email, and I think you're clear on the nuts and bolts of the Footerwave and Tafel stuff.
Mhm.
I might show that part, even though I know Dooley's, you kind of got it. We got it through email because someone else had a question related to making Tafel plots. So you might have to humor. I'm going to show that. But your follow-up question is, can you explain how charge transfer resistance plays a role when the overpotential is close to zero in the Tafel plot? So I have two responses. The first is that when the overpotential is zero, there's actually sort of a fundamental thing that the Tafel plot isn't the best idea, because technically speaking, and it's sort of a violation of the Footerwave. We talked about this last week. The Footerwave analysis is a bit of a it's a weird thing because it's largely kinetic. It looks like Butler-Volmer at the foot of the wave. So in theory, it's kinetic information. You can do Tafel transformation with some degree of confidence, but it's also Tafel analysis also fundamentally requires an irreversible one electron, technically, but whatever, an electron transfer process. And irreversibility sort of requires at least like 120 millivolts of overpotential. So there's a strange configuration here where it's like when the overpotential is zero, it's like you shouldn't even really be doing Tafel. However, there is also a definition. This is in Barden-Faulkner, where how does the charge transfer resistance relate to this? Well, the charge transfer resistance at zero overpotential is equal to R. I can't draw it all. I know, seriously. You're like, I can't.
I can't.
RT over N Fi0. So at
And R is the gas constant.
yeah, R is the ideal gas constant. This
Yeah,
is the charge
charge
transfer
transfer
resistance. To be clear, there's two R's. I know it's
Yeah,
confusing.
yeah.
This is at or E is equal to E0, right? At
Mhm.
0 over potential or at E0. This is a way to. This is actually what it means is that it allows you to calculate the exchange current density, whatever your preferred unit is, which actually, so before Alex goes insane,
Yeah.
allows you to get the heterogeneous rate constant.
Yeah.
Alex hates the exchange current because it's really just it's K.
Hate is a strong word. I have a preference for K.
Wish severe detrimental injury upon.
Maybe
Insofar as a constant could be injured.
maybe like a stub toe.
Yeah,
if they stubbed the toe.
If I0 stubbed its toe, that would be okay.
Don't want them to lose an arm or
No.
break a leg. That's serious. Stub toe.
That's fair.
That's fair.
That's not too violent.
That's not too
Yes.
violent. Yeah.
So, but Julie, to answer your question, basically the charge transfer resistance at 0 over potential correlates directly to the heterogeneous rate constant. It's actually quite kind of a nice relationship there. That's how that works.
Yeah.
And then I guess to your point, if there's no follow-up at the moment, Shazad was asking, what should I do?
Just for the Nyquist plot, instead of the potential baseline being at 0.1, do it closer to 0.5. Like I would do it at 0.5 and maybe
Or
plus
something like
minus 50 millivolts around it, and then you would see differences.
So make your baseline 0.5,
Yeah.
0.55,
Mhm.
So you're driving the reaction of interest.
Yeah.
Then see how the Nyquist plot is different, if at all,
Yeah.
for the three materials.
the three
Again, I
materials.
suspect it's possible you might find it to be similar even there,
Mhm.
for the reasons that I talked about. There's the zeroing of the difference in current anyway, but you might find that it is different, and that is
Yeah.
an indication. Perhaps I'm not quite right, and there is a substantial enough difference in the wiggle,
Yeah.
and that will manifest as better or worse charge transfer resistance among your materials, and you might be able to elucidate at those potentials, doing impedance at 0.55, 0.6, whatever.
Yeah.
You might be able to elucidate that material 1 has a lower charge transfer resistance than material 3, or whatever the order is, right?
Yeah.
So try impedance at different potentials. That's kind of long and short.
Mhm.
Okay, so to the point Julie's had made previously, I'm importing data, so bear with me here for a second. What is this? This is potential and current. I'm just putting into our software the data that was Julie's had sent. This is amps and volts. Let's make sure the units are correct. All right, so let me have this ready. There was someone that asked at the end of last week as well. First of all, they think we're a professor. That's funny. Can you guide us about how to make a Tafel plot from an LSV graph? I'm working in hydrogen production to do this. This probably works. So this is one of the things that I talk about a lot and try to not get enraged about and wish stub toes on anybody. But again, just to repeat myself, for any people who are thinking about Tafel plots and voltammetry data, you cannot just, or should not just, turn any voltammetry data into a Tafel plot. It's not appropriate. You must do so only when you are sure the voltammetry data are purely kinetic. The Tafel plot and the Tafel slope, as I will remind everybody right now from this webinar that I've given a few times, the Tafel
Let me hide the question.
Yeah. The Tafel equation is a direct derivation of the Butler-Volmer equation. This is the Butler-Volmer equation. I'm going to put this X over one of the terms because when it is irreversible enough, again, back to your point, Dooley, it's like technically at 0 over potential, it's not ideal to do Tafel stuff. You can, and there's that relationship that I talked about, which is useful, but only when it's kinetic information, which is tougher at 0 over potential. It can be the case, but if you don't have kinetic information, then it doesn't work. And so at a high enough over potential, you can neglect 1/2 of the Butler-Volmer equation. It allows you to solve the equation for over potential, and you get this expression. This is the Tafel equation. And then this coefficient here is the Tafel slope, RT over alpha NF. Log of E is just a number. This is the Tafel slope, and it is a direct manipulation of half of the Butler-Volmer equation, and it requires kinetic current. So I repeat myself always because if I had a nickel for every time someone takes a CV and just takes the log of current and flips the axes and look, I have a Tafel plot. No, you don't. You don't have a Tafel plot. You have nonsense data. Congratulations. Okay. I'm done being crazy. I will show you now the foot of wave analysis, and I will show you how to make this transformation when it is appropriate, in my opinion, which the foot of wave analysis is a relatively appropriate time to do so. Okay, so let me share our software. So Doolies, I have the data that you had sent earlier to me loaded into our software. So this is, I think, ferrocene data. And so the point here, back to the original question, and I'll show you how to make the Tafel plot about it, was that because it's Butler-Volmer kinetics, that's the only place that we can really, or ought to really, do Tafel analysis. And at the beginning of a CV or a voltammetry or an LSV, when we have this exponential increase, for the most part, this part of the curve is behaving like the Butler-Volmer equation, right? This part right here, like it's an exponential increase. Once I come up here and I get a peak and it decays, that's Cottrell equation, that's diffusion. We have other things going on, but for the most part, we are in a situation where we can roughly assume that this part of the data looks relatively Butlery, Volmerian, and we're good. Okay, so what we're going to do is I'm going to copy these points. I'm going to make a new plot.
I think that CV has a lot of solution resistance or something.
Yeah, that's something. Again,
but the
we're
point
going
of
to
it is
ignore
this.
that, even though I just raged about how you shouldn't do that. But yeah, because the separation in the peaks is pretty.
Yeah, it's
is
very like
very
skewed.
It's pretty bad. Yeah,
Pretty bad. It's okay.
I'm going to pretend it's not there, so I don't get mad at myself.
Yeah.
So okay, so the transformation, though, again to the other person's question, not you so much, Julius, although it is relevant to what you're talking about here. We isolate the points for the foot of the wave where it's roughly exponential increase. We can just sort of make the broad assumption this is roughly kinetic data. What we first want to do is we want to flip the axes. So I'm going to do that first. I'm just going to swap the X and the Y, replace the trace. We usually want potential on the Y axis.
And mind you, for those who couldn't see, another screen came up that showed.
Yeah, sorry, you can't see that screen.
Yeah, but the transformation was made where we flipped the X and Y axis.
Yeah,
that's exactly the same.
And then, yes, you won't be able to see the sub menu I'm doing, but basically now what I have to do is just take the logarithm of the X axis. Okay, and so I'm going to do that. You can't see this menu, but what I'm going to do is take the log of the X axis and replace it. And so this is my Tafel plot. You can't see there's no units because the logarithm naturally makes it a unitless quantity. That's just dimensionally what happens. And then what we do is we just take the slope of it, right? And we want to try to, isolate where it's flat. And we see actually we get a pretty nice, it's 117, 120. It depends on where you pick your slope, obviously, where you set the limits. But roughly speaking, this is what I would expect to get. My slope is right at about 120 millivolts per decade, which is indicative of a one electron transfer process, perfectly symmetrical, which is what I kind of expect to see. For ferrocene data, ferrocene's a pretty well-behaved one electron transfer redox couple. So even despite the fact that this might not be perfectly applicable to solution resistance, all these things, still for educational purposes, I think it's instructive to see how to make a Tafel plot. There you go. That is that right there. Again, to your point, Julius, I know what you asked the question, you seem to figure out what you did wrong. The point of this was that I could move. This is plotted against potential technically by the equation. Overpotential is the thing I'm supposed to plot. But hopefully you can see that if I shift from potential to overpotential, all that does is move up or down the y-axis. So what I can probably do is do a math operation, and what I can do is just add. I'm going to add like 100 millivolts to the y data. So this right here is the overpotential versus log of current plot. This is the potential one. So the blue one is a new plot. I've shifted and appropriately plotting versus overpotential. Now I'm going to take my baseline and I'm going to get the Tafel slope. Well, wouldn't you know it? It's exactly the same. I have the same limits, right? And that's because the Tafel slope is it doesn't matter whether I plot potential or overpotential because it just moves it up or down. Okay, so this is why. And again, I know Julie's, you probably figured this out, so apologies for just sort of repeating myself to you, but for others, folks don't always make the calculation from potential to overpotential because we are almost always just interested in the slope. And the slope does not change when you adjust the y-axis, only the y-intercept. Now, the y-intercept does change. And that is consequential if you are looking at, for example, the exchange current density can be calculated from the y-intercept. So one of the things I glossed over pretty quickly in my slide was, I'll just bring it up again for finishing this point, and then we'll move on, was that the Tafel slope is right here. And so whether this is overpotential or potential, the slope is the same. But the y-intercept is different. You saw that the intercept on those plots I just showed were different. And so the reality is that if which is not done very often, to be honest, but you can extract the I0 from the y-intercept. And so then it would be important for you to plot the overpotential and not the potential. So you would want to shift based on the E0. And then hopefully you can see, just to finalize this point, Julie's, you had asked what happens when you're at overpotential is 0. Well, when the overpotential is 0, you're at E0. And so I'm trying to think if I had a point that I can make with that. Maybe I'll leave it there. When your overpotential is 0, that's where the y-intercept is. There's a correlation here. I'm going to stop because I'm probably not going to say it properly. But anyway, that shows you how the shifting of the axis doesn't affect the Tafel slope, which is what most people are after. So I think that's the main point I want to make. Just kind of tying myself in knots, thinking through where the overpotential is. But anyway, hopefully that kind of clarifies the point for you.
All right. Shazab has kind of two things, two extra comments. One is that there's another problem. EIS is not fitting on PalmSense 4. And if that's the case, if it's not fitting, then how do I get fit data to get RCT? We don't know enough about PalmSense 4. We're Pine Research, but we do have our own impedance software for circuit fitting. And so you can import any EIS data and do circuit fitting on our software. Now, you need a circuit fitting license, but I can at least show you an example, but just to kind of give you an idea. But for example, I'm going to go here, I'm going to import some external data. And as long as we have 5 columns of EIS data, something like this, where you have the frequency, the real impedance, the imaginary impedance. You don't even need the Z magnitude and the phase. We just need at least 3 of these. Frequency, you can also have real. Oh, you can't see the pop-up. Let me
share your whole screen.
Let me share my whole screen. Right. So let me share entire screen. Okay. Wait.
Share entire. Click on it.
Just the middle. Oh, here we go. Okay. Share, and then if I go here, and okay,
it's like before you do that, it's an infinite.
It's the infinite mirror.
I love that. It's kind of trippy. It's kind of
fun. But here, and let me actually just cancel it so people can see from the beginning. From Pine, from Aftermath Blue, we can go to File. We can import external data. We can select the type of data. It doesn't just have to be XY like CV data, but we can do EIS. I created a CSV file where I import the 5 columns of EIS data. You only need 3. Frequency has to be one of them, but it could be real and imaginary impedance or
Phase and Z magnitude.
phase and the Z magnitude.
Yes.
Once you have that, you can import it. And I just created something that looks really nice. But from here, you can then go to circuit fit and then do circuit fitting. You can pick from a variety of different circuits, or you can create your own circuit to build it. And so I picked this one because I made this. And you can do a certain degree of fitting and simulation to match these using these circuit sliders. So
Set the first alpha to 1 to find it.
yes, set this to 1, lock alpha.
Mhm.
I'm learning. And then in this case, it fits. Now I created the data, so it's like it's a perfect fit.
Yeah.
But you'll ultimately run into situations where like, oh, it's a little bit hard, but you can say like adjust these parameters and then watch, oh, how does the Nyquist plot change both the Nyquist and the Bode plot, and help you estimate what are those values, whether it's the measured, what's the fit data, what's kind of the the statistics. So this is how we fit it. It also has Kramer's Kronig, so you can actually determine if you have legit impedance. If your impedance is valid, if you have valid impedance, that's the answer.
Legit is good too.
Legit impedance.
Your impedance is so illegitimate.
Yeah. So that's the thing. You can contact us if you're interested.
I'm gonna put a link.
Yeah. Oh
to
yeah,
a
that's
new
right.
Fancy website.
That's
now.
right. Yeah, we have
You
a
can
new
buy
website.
it directly from our website. So
Yes.
here is a link to our website with the EIS fitting software licenses that you could buy right on our website.
Yeah.
So if you're interested in what Alex was just showing, you can buy them right there.
Yeah.
We'll send you a fitting license.
He has another, let's say, follow-up. Let's just see.
Mhm.
If the system is not at steady state, let's say current is decreasing with time, should I run EIS or should I wait for the system to be steady?
Wait for it to be steady.
Yeah. Yeah.
Technically speaking, it's not valid impedance. It's not legit.
It's not legit
It's too
impedance.
legit to quit.
Yeah.
So no, it's actually if your current and your baseline is not stable,
Mhm.
you are physically incapable of collecting valid impedance data. It's a fundamental violation of the condition of stability.
Yeah.
EIS data must be linear, causal, and stable. And if it is not stable, the data are not fittable, technically.
Yeah.
Speaking.
So one thing to kind of keep in mind, because I know like if you do chronoamperometry, which I know you're doing, it looks like the data is always kind of decaying.
Yeah.
But just remember, like it decays very quickly in the beginning, and then it starts to very slowly stabilize. It's still going to keep decreasing, but if you're applying that, you can imagine if I'm applying a sine wave around that long time frequency thing, then it'll end up being you should hopefully get valid impedance, but just keep that in mind.
Yeah.
So yeah, and I think he says
You
that
might just need longer stability time.
Yeah, you might need
That could
longer
be
stability
probably-
time.
Okay.
Yeah, we have a question from Cigar. He's asking, can transmissive finite diffusion O and Warburg diffusion W both exist together in an electrode? What's a finite diffusion
I don't
O?
really think so.
What does he mean by a
That's a transmission line. There's one of
a
our
transmission line.
competitors uses O for it. We have a different way of doing the transmission line. I'll show you for what it's worth, since we're talking about our software here. But
Yeah.
For simulation purposes, I'll just draw a transmission. So transmission line, some people have O. I don't know what that's a different one. We have a fully customizable version of it. So you can add these certain things. You can change the components on the fly, the different the endpoints, the middle, the different elements of a transmission line, and you can generate the circuit that way, and it will actively change the model. I didn't even put any values in. I'm lazy. So just put something in, so I got I'm really paying attention. I'm being lazy, everybody. It's my fault. Okay. Anyway, you get the idea. You can modify the data What a stupid set of values. It's like
Just one,
I picked the
one,
most
one,
boring one because it's all capacitors. Anyway, that's a bad example. That's just what it looks like. It's literally just a straight. It's basically just capacitor.
Yeah, if you have a capacitor,
Just resistance. It's just resistance or just capacitance. I don't even know what it is. But anyway, this was a bad example. So ignore this specific example. However, in general, you can simulate different transmission line options in our software. And but to your point,
you wouldn't have a Warburg infinite diffusion inside.
So this is a fundamental misunderstanding, I guess, of the purpose of a transmission line element. The transmission line element is kind of its own facsimile of a diffusion process through a pore. So it's one or the other. You can, in some cases, model a porous electrode behavior as a Warburg, finite Warburg element. Okay, which definitionally describes diffusional processes through a fixed thickness or diffusion layer thickness, right? And then the only difference is whether the boundary of that diffusion layer is open or closed, basically, short, open or short, whatever the terminology you want to use, absorbing or reflecting. Okay, the boundary layer depends on what the data affects the way the data looks and how the mathematics work. A transmission line element is a semi-infinite sum that is used to describe. So one of the as an extension of what I just talked about, in that pore, where there's if you have a porous electrode and there's a diffusional sort of a process occurring in that, one of the phenomena that occurs in a pore where you have some pore structure with electrolyte in there and you have a diffusion process in there is that you have essentially a distribution of charge in the pore. Okay, and so one of the ways to handle that is via a Warburg element that kind of captures that behavior. Another is through a transmission line. It's a different representation of the same process. The transmission line is an infinite sum. Like the middle element is like there's a dot there because it's a mathematically it accounts for an infinite sum of usually resistors or capacitors at the interface within the pore structure, and it accounts for the distribution of charge. And it sort of normalizes it, and that's how mathematically the transmission line element works. But the point is that both of these circuit elements are different ways to describe the same process. So by using both of them, I am not sure that would be wise. It might be over-defined, over-constrained, so to speak, unless you had a situation where you had like a pore with a transmission line charge distribution kind of process going on, and then also on the surface beyond the pore there was some diffusional processes occurring where a Warburg element could define that, and you are able in the same impedance spectra to capture all of those behaviors distinctly at different frequencies. To my knowledge, that's not possible. Maybe it is. Maybe someone has data like that. I'm not aware of it. So probably my suggestion would be to use one or the other. Now, I have seen some situations and some of our competitors where, for example, they've put this monstrosity of a circuit and fit it. And I've seen it where it's like they put two transmission line elements and some Warburg stuff and some Randles elements, and it's like it fits perfectly. And great. Does that mean anything? Like ultimately you're fitting the transmission line, in particular that one, because it's like it's a way to just to attempt to capture as closely as possible the real situation that's occurring within a pore. The infinite sum and the distribution of charge within the pore, the transmission line is attempting to capture that behavior very accurately. And it accounts for the boundary at both ends of the pore. That's like a really descriptive process. So it's like adding so many more circuit elements just to make your fit match your data like one-to-one as perfectly as possible. At some point, it escapes, in my opinion, the realm of usefulness and like relating to reality, and you're just adding more circuit elements to try to make the line fit the dots. And that's not the point of impedance fitting. It's just not, right? The idea is not to make lines fit dots. It's to obtain a representation of what's really happening through circuit elements. So that's my read on the situation. I could be wrong. I fully acknowledge that. Like, there could be a legitimate explanation for using both elements simultaneously, but my inclination is to say to pick one or the other.
All right, we have a question from DOT 8190. Can I ask, is that EIS from potentiostat and galvanostatic gave the same or different information, and how or why is that? So thank you so very much. I think in principle, fundamentally, like from a theoretical perspective, they should give you the same information. But what often is the case is you use potentiostatic and galvanostatic EIS depending on the electrochemical system, the load, if you will, and how that load responds to a potential perturbation versus a current perturbation. So I've actually recently learned that like batteries really respond when you have a very high galvanostatic impedance. And part of this has to do with potentiostat design. It's very easy for a potentiostat to measure current. In a potentiostat based on the electronics, it's very easy to measure and even apply from a wide range of currents, from like pico to nanoamps to amps. Huge range, right? We're talking like a billion orders of magnitude minimum. You can apply and measure currents very accurately. But potentials are much more sensitive. So you really only have millivolts to volts as the range. You only have maybe, really 5 orders of magnitude, 4 orders of magnitude of voltage control, sort of say, with measured voltages. So in principle, if you had a load, whether it's a battery or an electrochemical cell, and you could apply a perturbation that was similar potentials or similar currents and get the same response, then you would get the same answer. But because potentiostats measure currents much better than they measure potentials within certain ranges, you'll end up getting different results depending on the system that you're working on. So that's kind of my response for why your EIS data would be different whether you're doing potentiostatic or galvanostatic impedance. So if you have any questions about that, just let us know. Okay, do you want to try?
Let's get to some of the saved ones.
Yeah, we can try to get to some of the saved ones.
So let me answer Apurva, since you just talked, and you can talk about the nickel deposition.
Yeah, I'll talk about
So Apurva had asked a few questions earlier, I think this morning, today, whatever day time you're in, that we saved. We haven't forgotten you, so apologies if it's taken an hour and 20 minutes to get to your questions. We do our best to get to everything. So Apurva said, hello, I have a few questions regarding EIS experiments. So number one, what is the criteria to choose the frequency range to perform EIS measurements? How can we optimize the range for electrocatalysis? I will answer, I guess, one at a time. So in general, a rule of thumb for frequency ranges, I tend to say the top or starting frequency is usually between 100 kilohertz and 1 megahertz. Depends on what your potentiostat is capable of. Most potentiostats can do 100 to 500 kilohertz, or even 1 or sometimes higher than 1 megahertz. Very often, especially for electrocatalysis, you are not going to get almost anything useful above 10 to 100 kilohertz. But you're not going to hurt anything by going to fast frequencies. For a couple of reasons. One of them is that the fast frequencies are over very, very quickly. So, I mean, from a time perspective, doing 1 megahertz to 100 kilohertz in that decade of frequencies, it's like it's over almost instantly. So like even if your data is garbage, like who cares? You might as well try it, right? So the high frequency range, even though some of it will be instrument artifacts, you'll have reference electrode stuff, it'll be wonky. You might not get anything useful at the high frequencies, especially for electrocatalysis, where you probably are working in aqueous or non-aqueous electrolyte. 1 megahertz to 100 kilohertz, good place to start. Probably 100 kilohertz, honestly, is sufficient, but you're not going to hurt yourself. Lower range, you're looking at probably 0.1 hertz or 100 millihertz. You can go lower than that. That is where it can hurt you for two reasons. One is that it takes a really long time and it's annoying. It's annoying to wait that long. 10 millihertz means it takes 100 seconds for one sine wave. 100 seconds is almost 2 minutes. So it's like every point, under 100 millihertz takes 1 to 2 minutes, which, maybe that's not too long for you. To me, in my opinion, that's like, it just drags. It can take a while. It depends how many points you take, right? So generally speaking, a lot of stuff you'll find at down to about 0.1 hertz is sufficient. You'll get the diffusion behavior, or you'll finish the semicircle enough that analysis is possible. But the other danger, in addition to the time and it taking a while and being irritating, is that systems drift a lot at the lowest frequencies. So when you go down to 100 millihertz or 10 millihertz, you can introduce drift that makes your system unstable, and the data down there will be noisier and kind of tricky. So generally speaking, you're looking to start between 100 kilohertz and 1 megahertz, go down to about 1 to 0.1 hertz, give or take. Somewhere between 6 and 10 points per decade is sufficient. And then honestly, just look at the edges of your data, the high and the low frequency edges. And usually in the Nyquist plot, for instance, is there some crazy stuff at high frequency? You can kind of tailor in the high frequency range. Is the low frequency range, do you need to go a little lower to capture more stuff that you're not seeing? Or do you need to rein it in and not go so low because it's getting really noisy at low frequencies? And so you can kind of have some trial and error there. All right, question number 2 from Apoorva, out of, I think, 3. Yeah, was, okay, so how to choose the potential to perform EIS measurements for oxygen evolution or hydrogen evolution studies. In fact, I have tried performing at various potentials, like the onset and OCP. The answer is it depends on what you're trying to study. Are you trying to study, for example, different catalysts and how well they perform HER or OER? Are you trying to study one catalyst and how it performs? For instance, you do seem to grasp that you're doing different potentials at the impedance. And so it's just what you're trying to study. So for instance, let's say you have one catalyst and you're trying to see how well it does OER and HER. And what often comes with these kinds of experiments is, for instance, the numbers are going to be wrong. So don't take my numbers as gospel here. I'm just making things up. Let's say that folks are looking at what is the overpotential for OER at 10 milliamps per centimeter squared current density, or 10 microamps per current, whatever the number is, okay? That's a thing, right? And so the potential at that particular current density might be, for OER, it's going to be up there at, 1.2, 1.4 volts or something versus NHE. Okay, fine. So what you might do is determine from voltammetry studies where you get the current density you're after. Then do impedance at the potential correlating with that current density and get the charge transfer resistance. That's one kind of analysis you might do. At open circuit potential, most probably you're not getting almost anything useful except the solution resistance, which is part of your last comment here, which is that solution resistance is more or less similar at all the potentials. That's good. That should be. You'll get some error in measurements, of course, just over the naturally. But for the most part, the solution resistance should be relatively unchanged at different potentials. And so, so actually there wasn't another question. That was just it. So what's the ideal potential to perform? So again, it's just what you're looking for. So whether it's up there in potential or just below 0 for the hydrogen evolution reaction, perhaps you're looking at some specific potential correlating to a current density for that reaction of interest. What is also the charge transfer resistance, and what is the interfacial capacitance? Those are metrics for which you can compare across other people's results. If you're studying multiple different catalysts, you might choose the same potential somewhere in the onset where HER or OER is happening. And for material A, you get a charge transfer resistance, whatever. Material B, you get then you're comparing charge transfer resistances at the same overpotential for different materials and seeing, well, whichever one has the lowest charge transfer resistance is doing the best, because the lower resistance means it's kinetics are faster, something like that. So those are just two possibilities to sort of address what you're looking for and what the thought process would be for choosing a potential at which you're doing your impedance for your OER and HER. So hopefully that answers Apurva's questions there that you had asked early on there. So
yeah. So I do want to answer this. There was a nickel deposition question that came earlier, and then we can get to some of the questions people are asking live. I'm not going to try to pronounce that right now. 8932. I'm doing nickel deposition on stainless steel in a 2-electrode system. One is cathode working, and the other is anode counter. Should I give cathodic voltage in negative or positive voltage? So this was a comment on YouTube, and we can answer comments during the live stream from YouTube. And we tried to describe, we tried to answer this by just saying like, oh, well, to plate nickel on almost anything, you start with nickel 2+, and you apply a negative bias of about 200 millivolts. I don't remember the exact number versus NHE. And that should be enough of a potential versus NHE to deposit solid nickel on your electrode.
Sorry, it's minus 0.257.
0.257.
Minus 0.257.
So 257 millivolts.
Yes,
minus 257 millivolts.
I think that's
is enough potential to drive that reaction. But there was, in general, what seemed to be the issue was there's confusion about anode, cathode, working electrode, counter electrode, positive, negative. And he just, it sounded like he had a hard time understanding, like, if I have the working electrode, which is the cathode, can I apply a negative voltage to this? Or if even though in my mind it should be like positive, or if I'm charging, if I'm discharging, blah, blah, blah. So one thing that's very important, or what we want to hope to convey, is in this electroplating environment, you don't have to think about it as anode and cathode in this particular case. You just have metal, which is the thing that you want to deposit the nickel on. That's going to be your working electrode. And then you have counter electrode, which just does nothing but balance the charge. That's all. So if you're doing a reduction reaction, you're plating the nickel on the working electrode. So you're going to do a reduction reaction on the working electrode. A oxidation reaction has to happen on the counter electrode. Now, the nickel to do the deposition is a dissolved salt. Most of the time, you're not stripping nickel from the counter to plate onto the working electrode, which some people could do, but I'm assuming that's not what you're doing in this case. But what you want to do is you want to make sure that the working electrode is negatively biased. So in your potentiostat, you should be able to, in a 2-electrode configuration, say apply, and here's the thing, you're not going to know what the value is, because in a 2-electrode situation, or a 2-electrode cell, you don't have a reference electrode. So the minus 257 millivolts versus NHE is useful, but it doesn't say, oh, apply this potential to figure out, what's going on, or to plate nickel. But what you can do is you can do cyclic voltammetry on your cell in the 2-electrode configuration. And as you sweep, and let me just draw this so that this makes it a little bit easier to understand. And I'll make a new slide. So what you want to do is some degree of cyclic voltammetry where, I want to make this thicker. Okay, so you have voltage, current, and start around 0 here. But you're going to want to drive this thing negatively until you start to see some current. And then you want to switch the potential this way, and then maybe here you're going to see some oxidation. And when you cycle and you want to do this at a slow scan rate, so you don't know what's going to happen, slow scan rate. So do this at a slow scan rate. And somewhere here, you're going to pick a potential. This is voltage versus counter. So when you hook up your potentiostat cell cable and you have what's called working here, and then you have counter here. They are connected to each other. You will have a voltage here, and it's going to be negative. Maybe it's negative 0.5, don't know. But that's going to make sure that the working electrode is negatively biased, because you want the electron from here to reduce the Ni2+ that's in solution. So in this case, forget anode and cathode. Working electrode, the thing that you want the plating to happen on, needs to be connected to the working electrode lead of your potentiostat, and the counter is connected to the material that you don't care about, that's just used to balance charge, and that's going to be, this is going to be positive with respect to the voltage. So the potentiostat is going to say, if you applied, say, -1 volt, it's going to be the voltage, going to be the difference between these two potentials is what's actually measured. So there'll be a -1 volt difference between working and counter if that's what you tell the potentiostat to apply. Let's say this is -1, right? So that's kind of the way I would approach this. Hopefully this at least provides a little bit of clarity, because for me, sometimes when people say anode, cathode, negative, positive, working, counter, it sometimes makes it confusing. What exactly do I have to do to get the thing to happen? But but this is the anode. No, this is the cathode. Well, it's just two pieces of metal, and then you have leads, and you want one to be negative and one to be positive, and that's how we'll define it.
I prefer to be positive.
I also like being positive too. So
those negative anodes, they just get you down. You can't trust them.
Yeah.
There's your dad joke of the day.
There's a dad joke of the day. Okay.
All right. So I think we have a couple other questions coming live. We'll try to get through these
I'll
here.
try to get
So Sagar had another follow-up. What should be the approach to reduce the IR drop of an electrode made for a supercapacitor? The IR drop doesn't really have anything to do with your electrode. It's more about the electrolyte. So first of all, let me think this through. The electrolyte is going to be a bigger contributing factor to your IR drop than the electrode. I don't really know, like if you're just an electrode.
I don't know enough about supercapacitors in general.
I mean, it's similar to a battery. It's a device where there's two electrodes, anode and cathode, basically separated, right? In this case, there's a dielectric material. It's usually a liquid. There's like solid states capacity, but usually supercapacitors are done in electrolyte. I'm not so sure that the IR that there's a lot of advice or analysis I can think to give as far as like on the electrode side, like how do you reduce the IR drop by messing with the electrode? It's more like the configuration of your supercapacitor. If you're working in a 3 electrode system, like getting the reference and the working electrode as close together. If you have 3 electrodes, getting the working and reference electrodes as close together as possible. Trying to make sure the frit, if you have a frit in your reference electrode, is not blocked or anything like that. That the reference electrode is behaving properly. That the electrolyte concentration is high. In some cases, it's getting everything as physically close and tightly packed. With a battery, that's the case. Capacitors not necessarily as critical as a battery to be like close and have pressure, but I think it can help. So like the distance physically in your device can affect those things, but that's really what more impacts the IR drop, because that's what makes the R high, and then whatever the current is makes your IR, I times R, larger, right? It's much less I guess impacted by the electrode itself. I think if the electrode has really low electrical conductivity, if you're working with something that's got a wide band gap or something, and it's like not electrically conducting, it can add to the resistance of the connection, and some of that could be the case, but not as often as it's like the electrode is the problem, if you will. I don't know. something like that. I mean, do you have any?
Yeah,
That's
I really just don't know enough about, like, I imagine a supercapacitor based on like electrical double layer
it's
capacitance
basically
or
what it
something
is.
like
You're
that.
just doing CVs at faster and faster rates, and that's really it, right?
But are they taking like two materials and then they're pressing them together like a capacitor with a dielectric, so they want it super squeezed in?
Sometimes, and sometimes it's literally just like an RDE setup. Like you just get a glassy carbon electrode, you do a thin film deposition, and you measure the capacitance of a supercapacitor material that way. Like it's done that way. And they just do CVs over 100 millivolt range, and it's just double layer.
Yeah.
And you just, it's exactly what we talk about all the time. It's I is equal to C times scan rate, and you just measure the different scan rates, and you measure the capacitance. Like that's done a lot.
Then
so it's like the electrode doesn't have anything to do with it as much. I mean,
because there's no, ideally it's just capacitance. There's no resistance.
Exactly.
It's only based on like the cell, the cable leads and those other connections.
And even then, it's like the IR drop just doesn't affect things that much. You're not looking for a Faradaic reaction such that it would be impacted by an IR drop. It doesn't matter. Even if things are shifted, there's no Faradaic reaction. So what is it? It doesn't matter, right?
There's technically okay. Well, this gets into like the pseudocapacitance thing, where like Faradaic reactions confined to like a very small space are able to store more charge. But this is like this actually may be a question. This may be more of a question for like an electrical engineer, because electrical engineers know that like an actual capacitor isn't purely a capacitor. Like it has little, like nothing acts as a purely theoretical capacitor. It has some resistance, and I don't know where that comes from.
Make sense. It's not a resistor.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I guess that's sort of the short answer, is that it doesn't.
And at the limits, like what does a material? Because like some materials just have an intrinsic, some materials have an intrinsic resistance to it, and then when you put certain materials together, they have an intrinsic capacitance because they create charge separation. So, but to what degree? Sometimes it's like so small it doesn't even matter, or you can't even measure it.
Well, in short, we don't really know.
Yeah.
Or don't worry about it.
Yeah.
It's one of the two answers. It's either don't worry about it or we don't know. In so far as it does affect things, and it doesn't. It's not obvious to me how or why that should matter much. So anyway, that's about the best answer I guess we could give to that.
Yeah. Need to learn more about supercapacitors.
I suppose.
Talked to Veronica at NC State.
Yeah.
She's very. She knows a lot about that.
Well, until then, we move on to Michelle's question here. So, my thesis is about minimizing polarization losses in vanadium redox flow batteries. By replication of impedance measurement, we see an increased charge transfer resistance in all the measurements. How? And the follow-up is the key. You say that all components are the same. I'm sure that you think they are. The reality is they are not, my friend. So the answer is that your components are probably not exactly the same. I know that you are probably doing your very best to replicate what you're reading. This is most likely an engineering problem. Vanadium redox flow batteries, by their nature, are very difficult to get right. When you have flow and you have a lot of settings, there are like 9 different degrees of freedom that you're working with. The flow rate, the fittings, exactly the volume, the volumetric flow rate, the pressure of the system, how it's constructed, the quality of your electrodes, how well you've built your membrane electrode assemblies, and how well everything is, so that you may have the impression or the idea that you've built it precisely to specification. And the reality is that there's some part of it that's not quite exactly the same. I mean, I've seen this time and time again. My boss from grad school was very famously did a lot of these kinds of engineering parametric studies, where studying fuel cells and electrolysis cells, for example, making them precisely the way, so to speak, it does, written in the literature. You make your MEA, you put your platinum on carbon here, and you press your bipolar plates there, and you put your flow controllers here, and you put the humidity there, and you do all the things. And it's like adjusting any of those parameters ever so slightly. I think he said he was able to get 10 or 100 times difference in performance whether it was impedance or current density, power density, whatever the metrics are that are being looked at in that particular case, just by tinkering with some of those parameters. So the reality is, I think, unfortunately, that these components and things are, I trust that you're certainly doing it and attempting to do it the same and, compare appropriate with the literature. That's the scientific process, right? You're doing a good job with that. But there's probably just a lot of trial and error associated with this, where there's so many components at play, and you're going to have to tinker with stuff and adjust some of these different components and everything. I would say you're looking more for consistency within your own set of experiments if you are struggling to find, how should we put it, perfect adherence to literature. If you're struggling to get your results to look precisely the way literature or whomever's publications, look, it's not, your resistances are high or your polarization curve doesn't look quite right. Okay, that's normal. Like a lot of the papers you'll read, it's sort of normal. It's hard to replicate perfectly. I mean, in a perfect world, it's like you should be able to read someone's experimental section and replicate their data perfectly, obviously. But there's always little things that aren't said precisely. There's little tricks of the trade that come with making different devices that they know that maybe you don't know quite yet, or there's just little things. It's electrochemistry. It's quite complex, and there's a lot there. So my point is, I think that you will probably need to find yourself getting consistent results with your own process. So even if it's not matching literature perfectly, if you're getting relative consistency with your own results, that to me is a good sign. That's a better sign than, it doesn't match perfectly with literature. You're using it as your guide, but hopefully you'll find your own pathway and you'll kind of get your own results that way. It's the best advice I guess I can give in this regard.
Yeah. Okay. We have about 15 minutes. There's a bunch of questions, and actually, I just noticed Elijah came on. We've been pushed back on so many of these questions because Elijah sent us the EIS data. We've looked at it, Elijah.
Oh, is it the corrosion data?
It's the corrosion data.
Oh, Elijah, you're here.
He's actually here.
You're showing an EIS for the requested help. I have your data, Elijah.
Yes.
I'm gonna.
We did look at it.
I don't mean to insult anybody else. I have your data. Let me load it up and I'll show you. I have already looked at your data, Elijah. I want to do you the
yeah, because he's actually here this time.
Yeah, let me.
It's been like 2 weeks.
I know. We had it.
We had it
previously, and it was just like these. We have so many questions. I'm not complaining. I'm very grateful for everybody with your questions.
And we'll try to get to everybody's question,
Yes.
as much as
Elijah,
possible.
I have it in CSV format. I'm just going to put it into our software real quick here.
And we have analyzed it. We already know.
I'll show you the analysis for sure.
Yeah.
I think it's positive ZI. That's why I have to make sure I
that's one thing that we have to do.
And make sure it looks. Yeah, this is it. All right, Elijah. Thank you for coming back.
Yes.
Here is your data. And if you say that's not my data, then that's a big problem. I think this is your data. So you have this kind of corrosion, odd-looking inductive. I want you to be careful, Alex. It's an inductive loop.
I'm triggered.
You're triggered. Alex doesn't like inductive loops.
Right. And this is a weird inductive loop.
This is a very weird one. Okay, so I'm going to do two different kinds of analyses relatively quickly, so hopefully we can get to other folks' questions before we finish. But Elijah, there's a fundamental problem with your data, okay? It's not valid. So this kind of loop and curl that comes back towards the origin is a phenomenon that is observed for real. It's called an inductive loop. It's a thing. We do see it in data from time to time. It's weird, but it does happen. It can be valid. In your case, it is not. So Kramer's Kronig is the really important analysis to do, right? This is what checks for the conditions of EIS validity. And what it tells me is that for the most part, the second half of your data are not valid. So you can see very clearly in the Nyquist plot, the blue phase angle trace kind of illustrates it clearly, right? It's really tracking pretty well for half the frequencies. So from about 100 kilohertz down to about 10 hertz, we're pretty good. It's roughly good, but lower than that, it's just drifting. There's no match here. This blue line is totally out of whack. It looks closer on the red, but it's just because it's logarithmically scaled. It looks close, but it actually isn't. And it's all over the place here. And then on the Nyquist plot, you see that all these data, for the most part, there's a little bit of an artifact at high frequency. But basically, once you start getting to low frequency, all this just doesn't match, okay? What I will do is the thing that you're not usually supposed to do, but just for educational purposes, I'll show you the kind of circuit that you would usually use. I'll show you that it doesn't fit well. And the reason it doesn't fit well is not because the software is terrible. It's because, I know you can't see this yet. The reason it doesn't fit well is because Kramer's Kronig has indicated that this isn't really valid. However, this circuit right here, you see this like 3-tiered kind of circuit. This is the corrosion circuit. So it's like a Randles or a Voigt element where you have a leading resistor for the like solution resistance. You have an RQ or an RC, and then you have this third parallel element of an inductor and a resistor. The inductor is what captures this weird curl and loop. So the best that I can do for your data is I'll show you kind of the final analysis fitting. What I have to do is make this crazy value for the inductor. Otherwise, it doesn't really fit it. Although it never quite fits it anyway. But you see how that starts to curl? Voila, right there, right? And I have to adjust some of the values a little bit. This one has to go, I think, this way. Try to match the blue. See how the blue line is kind of matching up? That's a little bit better. I don't have to worry too much about alpha at the moment. The R1 is fitting pretty well. What I'm actually going to do is ignore some of these high frequency points because it's just a bit of an artifact. So I don't want any of that. That can go away. The R1 can kind of scoot over, or like 52 or something like that. 52.5. That's good enough for me. I'm going to lock it there just for now. Let me zoom back out. Okay, and I'm going to mess with these a little bit. It's already actually relatively close. I mean, again, it's not going to fit that well no matter what, because Kramer's Kronig has indicated these data are not really valid. However, we'll still kind of give it the old college try here. This one will affect the underneath loop with, it's never going to get right. I'll just kind of start here. Let's just do something. It's not going to be great. It's not in this case it's sort of trying to fit the curl. It's missing the middle part, but it kind of has the right shape. See how the blue line, it kind of peaks up and then goes back down. It's actually not terrible, but this is about as good as you're going to get it because Kramer's Kronig is like, hey, don't bother. Right, that's what it's telling me. But roughly speaking, what we're seeing here is some kind of a corrosion process whereby at the low frequencies, we're observing the situation where the material is starting to corrode, which is a preferential electrochemical process, which means that the impedance is decreasing as it corrodes more. A decrease or reduction in the impedance means that the points on the Nyquist plot get closer to the origin because the vector from the origin to any point is the impedance. And so the points getting closer to the origin means the impedance is going down. And the only component that can fit that behavior is an inductor. And so we have an inductor. And you see the value of this inductor is ridiculous. What is this? I got to come here to see that. What's the prefix? Kilohenries.
Yeah.
I'm not sure you can quite appreciate how big a 200 kilohenry inductor is. It's like it'd be like if an inductor was the size of France, something like that.
Yeah, like a train.
Yeah,
like a giant magnet the size of a train.
Yeah, the size of a train
with copper,
which uses
coiled around.
Which uses the entire electrical grid of Europe to just power it.
Just to power it.
So in other words, it's not, that has not been shrunken down and placed onto your electrode. It's not real. Like the value is there to make the data fit. It's like the opposite of what I keep preaching about. Like don't fit just to make the points look like the line. With the inductive loop phenomenon, you kind of just you're doing that because there's no other way to make this feature happen mathematically. Mm-hmm. So we're stuck with this like weird situation of like I have to add an inductor and do this thing, otherwise it doesn't fit. Mm-hmm. That's kind of all you can do. So Elijah, that's my take on your data. I hope that's useful for you. You might need to kind of clarify the low frequency if you want to get data that's more able to be analyzed.
Yeah.
In short. So there you go. Thank you for sticking with us and coming back. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
To be able to kind of answer your questions. So.
going back in order. Let's see. Shazab is asking, what is the best frequency type? Number of frequencies, max frequency, minimum frequency on EIS. Does the results have any effect on changing any frequency parameters? I think when it just comes to frequency, I don't know. I kind of think of it as like the x-axis, sort of say. It's like you're going to have a real and an imaginary impedance at each frequency, and you can envision a circuit, if you will, and the circuit that represents your electrochemical system. And at each frequency, it's going to give you a specific response. So a lot of people will pick. Now, the interesting thing I'd say about frequency is that the higher the frequency you go to, there are other things, artifacts, if you will, that can play a role and get incorporated into your impedance. So I think if you look at just a single one electron transfer system, we usually model it with a Randles circuit. And if we just model that Randles circuit, it's like, oh, well, the effective frequencies where you'll see things may be around the 10 kilohertz to 1 millihertz or something, or not 1 millihertz, 100 millihertz is where you'll see the effective chemistry. But when you go to really fast frequencies, things like capacitors, inductors, those types of circuit elements, their impedance starts to have a real, like a more meaningful impact at very, very high frequencies. Like at low frequencies, it doesn't really matter so much. In fact, the impedance of a capacitor is effectively zero at infinitely high frequencies. But the impedance of an inductor has a very high impedance at fast frequencies. So if you have inductive elements that are in the cell cables, they'll start to manifest in your EIS data when you have really, really high frequencies. Yeah. So, and then similarly, Neil has commented on like the minimum frequency is almost a time
That's what I'm
related
showing
issue.
here. So
Yeah.
one of the things I was going to do to illustrate that point home
Yeah.
was that everything you're saying, for example, at high frequencies, you're going to start manifesting inductance in the cables and whatever. You won't see the capacitive elements at high frequency. And then at low frequency, you're going to see diffusional things, whatever. For the most part, an answer to your question is that the frequency range does nothing to affect the processes. It just allows you to see them.
Yeah.
So the range at which you do your frequencies allows you to see stuff. For example, this, I've drawn sort of a typical Randles circuit here. Mm-hmm. And you can see at this particular frequency range, I've gone from 1 megahertz.
Highest question.
I've gone from 1 megahertz to 50 hertz. And it's like, I just have a semicircle. Well, if I go to a lower frequency, if I go to 0.1 hertz, well, now I start to see my tail. And so basically, this is the diffusional stuff, the Warburg diffusion. So the point here is that what effect does the frequency have? Well, if I don't go to a low enough frequency, in some cases, I won't capture the diffusional behavior. I won't even see it. And then if I start at too low of a frequency, my high frequency, look what happens to the left side of the Nyquist plot.
Starts to go down a little bit.
Go enough, not enough. I need more dramatic. It's not going to finish the semicircle. There you go. Didn't do it enough. There we go. So I had to make it. So if you started at 1 kilohertz, for example, well, now it's like not completing the semicircle to the left. Mm-hmm. So all that the frequency range really does is clarify the data on either end, essentially. If you don't go low enough, you won't see all the features you're after. If you don't go high enough, you won't see all the features you're after there. And if you have barely any frequency range, you won't see almost anything. So that is an advocate, that's why I advocate for something like 1 megahertz down to 1 hertz or 0.1 hertz, because you'll capture most of the stuff. And at worst, you'll just have data that's not useful. But you can always adjust the range afterwards. But all you're doing is allowing yourself to see more stuff, basically. So try to be liberal on your choice of the frequency ranges, so you can see everything, and then you can clarify the range afterwards. That's my suggestion to you. All right, we've got precious few minutes remaining. Let's try to kind of get through people. If
one other thing actually about Shazab's thing about the frequency. You asked about number of frequencies. Like you can actually sample like a bunch of frequencies within just like 1 decade, if you will.
Yeah, so it's usually 6 to 10 points per decade.
Yeah, and the thing is, it just means the experiment kind of takes longer,
Right.
and it'll be harder to do circuit fitting because circuit fitting inherently is looking at all those data points when it's making the fit. It's more mathematically
If you do 10
computationally
10
complex.
points per decade is usually like the upper limit for maintaining your sanity as a human being, right? If you do 20 points per decade or 15 points per decade, you're going to want to quit. I mean, you might want to quit already, right? Because impedance is hard. But if you start doing like way too many points per decade, it just takes absolutely forever.
Yeah.
And it's the same thing. It's like, you're doing CV. Do you want to take a point every millivolts, every 100 microvolts, or every 6 volts? Like
Yeah.
it's just how much resolution do you want to have, right?
Yeah.
With impedance, it's just more of a thing because it takes longer. Each of those points is one frequency the potentiostat has to crank through. And so any fewer than like 6 or 5 points per decade, and it's like really spread out points, and your fitting will be a little less accurate because you just have fewer data points.
Yeah.
Any more than 10, you might have nice accurate data, but it's just a pain. It takes forever. So it's just an optimization thing. But that's why I say 6 to 10 is usually a decent. I usually, when I'm just tinkering around and playing with stuff and finding out, I usually do 7. 7's my number. There's it's not right or wrong. That's just my random choice. I usually do 7. It doesn't take too long for me, but it's enough that I can do it. I can then analyze stuff. That's usually how I do it. So
we once had a guy who had like 100 data points per
gosh.
decade, and it took a solid 2 minutes every instance he wanted to do circuit fitting.
Trying to do circuit fit, it took forever. So please don't do 100.
Yeah, don't do 100.
It's just for everyone's sanity.
Yeah,
please don't.
It's unnecessary.
Way too many.
It doesn't make your data more accurate.
No, it doesn't. It's totally unnecessary. Okay, so Anderson, good to see you again as well. So my research is on hydrogen evolution over DSA anodes. I had to look this out. I don't know what DSA. It looks like Denora is a company that makes. It's some proprietary thing, so I'm not sure we can know. But they're anodes, titanium anodes coated with proprietary mix of a whole bunch of crap. Cool.
Okay.
Anyway, but it looks like it's basically like some kind of a mesh, like a titanium mesh or something like that. And so you're asking what's the better approach, transmission line or circuit fitting? And they conflict. So transmission line is a type of circuit fitting. It's just a different circuit. So again, I'll kind of go back to our software and show you what these are. But circuit fitting is the act of taking data, as I was doing with this with Elijah's data, right? The solid points. This is the Kramer's-Kronig, I guess. Look at the circuit fit. The points are the raw data, and the line is the circuit fit. And so I am adjusting parameters of a bunch of circuit elements to try to match the line and the dots, right? I'm going to do it to this. It's not going to be the most relevant thing, but transmission line is a type of circuit. Okay, so the first sort of direct answer to your question is that you're splitting hairs here. Like transmission line is a type of circuit fitting. This isn't going to be the best fit. I'm just going to see what happens. Hey, look, it's not terrible. What the heck? Why not, right? I don't know. Can I even get a decent value? Is it even worth it? Is it worth it? He asked to nobody. I guess Kramer's-Kronig told me I shouldn't even bother, but I'm gonna bother. Let's see how well transmission line fits this data. It actually fits the Bode plot better than the Nyquist plot. The Nyquist plot's like never gonna look quite right, but the Bode plot doesn't look terrible. Anyway, look, it's transmission line. Okay, so the point is that transmission line is a type of fitting. Okay, whether or not you should use transmission line depends on what your data looks like. Now, without spending forever on the intricacies of transmission line fitting, generally speaking, it's used for porous electrodes. Okay, pores of some finite thickness. Now in the DSA anodes, I just don't know. I haven't used those, but it looks like it's some kind of a mesh, which might mean there's some kind of a porous microstructure, right? I'm not talking about a mesh, which is like a macrostructure. If it has some kind of a microstructure, that might line itself up for transmission line, no pun intended. It might be appropriate fitting, but the data will kind of indicate that. And I can just sort of as a general rule of thumb, it's probably better to draw it than even just tinker with the parameters in the software. Where's my here? Transmission line data tends to look something like this. You tend to get, like on the Nyquist plot, it will look like it'll have like this lagging kind of a thing, and then it's like a semicircle. So you'll have this sort of 45-degree angle. Sometimes it'll be like that or whatever, but there's always sort of this lagging feature, and it's usually at the beginning. This is usually where you can have your transmission line circuit. Something like this. So that's usually what that looks like. That is a very loose kind of explanation. So the data sometimes drives whether that element or set of circuit elements is appropriate or can be applied to your data. But again, it's more about how the data look and whether or not you have this kind of porous microstructure that lends itself to that. So, yeah. Good to see everybody else.
Yeah,
so I guess with some comments. Nice
people. Yeah, Cody Cash was from the University of Houston workshop that we did last year.
Oh, cool. That was when I was at, I think.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah. So it was good to see him and people. And we do have workshops. So actually, on our new website, there is a place where you can
link it.
go to. Just link it. We have a new website, by the way. Just kind of soft marketing. If you've gone to the pineresearch.com, you'll notice it looks different.
It's new and fancy.
A revamping, if you will, of the website.
That's the workshops page. Might as well put the webinars page too.
Yeah, webinars page, workshop page. We have all that information. So if you're interested in learning, getting hands-on experience, we're going to be around different universities. Mostly, oddly enough, mostly on the East Coast. But you'll be able to find us if you want to sign up to attend one of our workshops with us. Yeah. There is one more question I think we can answer
the last bit
very quickly. I don't know. Murtkan, he's just asking, how's Fick's law, diffusion, Randles-Sevcik equation is used and applied in articles, or are they completely theoretical? So generally speaking, so for example, the Randles-Sevcik equation, which I'll just show so that everyone's on kind of the same page.
Everything's theoretical.
But like, so this is the Randles-Sevcik equation, and that is showing up good. People will just use the equation as an equation that relates the peak current in the cyclic voltammogram. They'll use this equation to calculate things like the diffusion coefficient, right? So it's used, it's theoretically derived, and similarly, the Cottrell equation, or not the Cottrell equation. Well, the Cottrell equation is derived from Fick's law of diffusion. So in terms of its use in articles, people will use this equation. They'll cite it as what they use to do a calculation, whether it's numbers of electrons, the area of the electrode, diffusion coefficient. They'll use that, practically speaking. And then some people on doing higher level math will start with something like Fick's law and then set boundary conditions based on their electrochemical cell, and then they may even derive an equation or an expression for the current to kind of showcase like, oh, the current response is different and it matches a diffusion response for a pseudo diffusion closed, finite spaced with weird cell geometries. They may use Fick's law as the starting point for a more detailed mathematical description. So that's how I've at least observed it be used in articles from both a theory and a practical calculations perspective.
Let me answer this one last one because I'm realizing that Sana had asked this question on this event.
Oh, yeah.
And so it's a relatively quick kind of a discussion. So this person said, hi, why? It was earlier in the week, so perhaps you'll watch this replay if you're not here now. Why in my EIS at high frequencies there's no semicircle, rather random dots here and there? So there's a couple of reasons why. Probably one of them is that at high frequency, if you're doing a 3-electrode system, you're going to have effects from your reference electrode, and that can lead to randomness. That can lead to what we call sort of very generally instrument artifacts. It's a capacitance in the glass sometimes. That's a different kind of phenomenon. I'm not going to get into in too much detail, but suffice it to say, a lot of times at high frequencies, especially if you have a liquid system, the basically the impedance of the reference electrode can make it hard for the potentiostat to keep up, and you just get error. And so you get sort of dots here and there, things like that. It depends what system. You didn't say what system you're doing, but generally speaking, a lot of times the answer to this is to simply start at a lower frequency, because a lot of times these randomness at high frequency, while sort of concerning or a problem in terms of, oh, the data doesn't look good, you're not missing anything. You might be if you're looking at a solid state system or something like that, and you need those frequencies, fair enough. But in a lot of cases, it's like the high frequency issues are not part of frequencies where processes are happening that you're trying to probe or interrogate. And so just drop the maximum frequency by a decade or something. Like if you're starting at a megahertz and the data are all over the place, just start at 100 kilohertz or 10 kilohertz. You're probably going to be fine. The other possibility, and it does tend to happen, and it can happen at high frequency, it can happen at at any frequencies essentially, but is that you might need to increase your amplitude. Okay. A lot of times noisy data and kind of all over the place points is because the response is you're not perturbing the system, you're not impeding the system enough. So if you're doing like 5 millivolts amplitude, let's just say, sometimes it's really noisy because it's not feeling that. Try 10 millivolts, try 15 or 20 millivolts. There is a limit by which you probably can increase it, and you'll run into some problems, for instance. Because, for instance, V is IR, so if you're doing potentiostatic, right, I is equal to V over R, right? Okay, so thinking this through, as the R goes up, the I goes down. So having a higher amplitude can sometimes help clarify these points, especially as the frequency drops as well, because if your dots are happening all over the place, then that can help make it better, because as the frequency changes, the impedance changes, and sometimes it's the opposite at high frequency because of inductive stuff and whatever. So all this is to say that if the response is a small number, when the potentiostat or the software analyzes those impedance, it's like it'll just be everywhere because it's not the resolution, the signal to noise isn't good. So increase your amplitude, try seeing if that clarifies some of those points, and watch your Lissajous plots if you can. Make sure they don't look deformed. Run Kramer's Kronig, as always, on all of your tests to make sure that you haven't got too high of an amplitude so that it's not linear anymore. But with most systems, they can tolerate increases in the amplitude to a little bit of a degree, and it won't destroy the data, I guess. So try that. That might help. And then please, if you do see this later and you want to follow up with what your system specifically is or what your data looks like, we can take a look at that and try to comment further. But that is where we are going to leave it. So I know we went over today, but we really appreciate the questions. We had a lot of questions. I hope we always try to get through them, especially if you've asked them earlier in the week or just before we went live. We do see all your questions. We do catalog them. If you ask the very last second, we try to catalog it for the next week. That's what we did with the Tafel plot thing here. So we appreciate the engagement. We do our best to, even if we don't know all the answers, to just give everybody's question, justice as much as we can. So that's my little, my little deal, I guess.
Your deal.
That's what we do. We're doing our best here. And this is our 90th episode. We are approaching 100 of these episodes. Can you believe it?
Yes.
I can't.
It's crazy.
This was a flyer of an idea that I had like 2 years ago, or that we sort of both had.
Yeah.
I don't know. And I can't believe it's still a thing. I really can't say how much I appreciate everybody out there who watches our live streams. We're just a small little American company doing our thing here, and we're taking over social media by storm. That's what we're doing. It's fun. Yeah. Anyway, thank you so much, genuinely, to everybody that joins us every week. And I guess next week, soon we'll be in San Diego. It's not for 2-3 weeks, right?
We still have.
Is that the last week of March, I think?
It's the last week of March. We'll be able to do. We'll probably still be able.
Yeah, because Friday we'll be back.
We'll be back.
We'll get back Thursday. Yeah, so we're probably not going to miss a week because Alex and I are so dedicated. Yeah, we're going to travel home. We're still going to do this live stream.
Yes.
Probably.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Anyway, we probably won't miss a month for a little while. We're in the thick of the semester here for everybody. So anyway.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. Well, that's it. I'm going to stop talking now, and
we'll see you next week.
See you next week. Take care.
Bye.